everyone, it's Doug Green, and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News. And I'm very pleased to have with us today Jenna Wells of Supply Wisdom. Jenna, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Really excited to be here and talk about this topic.
Well, we are going to be talking about the Digital Operation Resilience Act, DORA, which I think a lot of people think is simply an EU thing, but we're going to talk about how it's also connected to our markets here and also abroad, and also to the MSP, MSSP communities, and many other people. So it's a really big topic. We're going to be diving into it in just a minute. But Jenna, what is Supply Wisdom?
So Supply Wisdom is really a leading risk intelligence platform, and we help companies monitor and manage their risks in real time, which is incredibly crucial in today's fast-moving business and geopolitical landscape. So our platform leverages AI and looks both wide and deep across 7 different risk domains. So you might be used to monitoring platforms or risk assessment tools that only look at maybe one domain of risk, whether that be ESG, cyber, operations, compliance, financial. What Supply Wisdom does is looks across all of those domains to give you radical transparency into your entire supply chain from both a third party or vendor and a location standpoint.
So let's dive right into DORA. So help me understand, first of all, what is DORA? And why is DORA, why should enterprises, carriers, and MSPs care about DORA?
Absolutely. So, it's interesting. I feel like this is the most used word in my vocabulary, probably for the last 2 months within our organization and also with all of our customers and prospects. So DORA, the Digital Operational Resiliency Act, is a EU regulation designed to strengthen the digital resistance of financial institutions. And it really requires firms to manage their information and communications technology vendors. So it could not be more applicable to those industries that you just stated. And although it's an EU regulation, think of the global business landscape and just the outsourcing population of all the major companies in the world. We are operating in Europe. So even if your company is not headquartered in Europe, I can almost guarantee that you have a customer or a piece of your supply chain that is operating out of Europe, which means that this regulation is applicable to you. So it's incredibly broad, stretching really across the globe when you look at the global financial institutions and how interconnected they are with their day-to-day and also with their outsourcing population.
So with all that, what are the challenges this kicks up?
I think they're really endless. And I don't say that to be scary, but really the first thing I think about and what we're hearing when we talk about DORA within the risk management, kind of realm is, do you have a true view of your entire outsourced population? Because DORA, it requires you to continuously monitor those specific types of vendors like telecommunications, ICT vendors, the technical tools and resources that you're using to store, create, and share information. And really think about that statement. You need to monitor those vendors that store, create, and share information. That is hundreds of thousands in our interconnected world, especially within financial institutions. So I think really the first hurdle that you need to overcome when making sure that you're compliant with DORA is that you have a true holistic view of your outsourced population. And when I say outsourced population, I'm including vendors, third parties, OSPs, MSSPs, any vendor that you're outsourcing a function to or that they're outsourcing a function to. So the first step that you really need to do is identify your vendor population. The second step to maintain or ensure our DORA compliance is to identify those critical suppliers. So once you're able to identify your outsourced population, what subset of those suppliers are critical? And then to go deeper, why are they critical? Are they critical per your contractual requirements? Are they critical because they provide a service that you cannot operate without? Are they critical because they help you maintain communication with your customers? You need to go by your industry, by your vertical, by your internal risk appetite statement in your regulatory environment to identify those critical suppliers. And then you need to prove that you have assessed them and you continuously monitor them so your supply chain is resilient. I think resiliency is really the name of the game here. And you are not resilient if you do not know where your risks or your supply chain is.
And it's interesting because we have now been on, I guess, almost a 15-year cloud journey of progressively companies large and small progressively sourcing out certain functions, storage, communication, you name it.
Absolutely.
And so you're saying even the largest and most sophisticated companies, carriers, what have you, might really not be fully aware of how far that's gone.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point where one, I would respond to that by saying you can outsource the function or the service. You can never outsource the risk. So first, from a true risk management perspective and making sure you have the appropriate risk posture, you always need to take ownership of those outsourced population, and you need to know that population. Second, I love how you brought up, the cloud environment and outsourcing to the cloud. And I think this goes back to, still a misconception amongst a lot of people. There are physical goods that go into building the quote unquote cloud, right? Where there's actually a supply chain that has coming from many different locations in many different industries that are building the data centers, that are providing the fuel, that are staffing these data centers that house the different clouds. And that's also an area of a vendor population that is DORA that DORA applies to, and you need to maintain DORA compliance. And that's just such an interesting aspect, I feel like, because everyone thinks of, AI and technology. Well, you need physical goods to build those technologies. And there's also a supply chain and vendors that provide those that fall under the DORA regulatory environment.
So it sounds like this is one of these occasions where you're going to need maybe a partner to identify things that are hard to see.
Absolutely. And to be perfectly honest, that's why I joined an organization like Supply Wisdom. So I actually came from the customer side. I used to manage the third-party risk team at Iron Mountain. And Iron Mountain, we like to call it, is everyone's critical supplier, right? It's located across the globe in 50 plus countries with thousands of suppliers. And I was so motivated to join an organization that helped and that builds a platform that I would want to use as a practitioner or as a risk management professional responsible for maintaining compliance across all of these regulations on the global landscape. And really, you cannot maintain compliance without continuous monitoring tools and technology. Tools like Supply Wisdom, they allow you to have a full view of your vendor population. They reduce the noise. They notify you of any changes. And, to break it down specific to DORA, they help you solve, individual facets that are written in the regulation. The monitoring of service location. The monitoring of service concentration risks. You need to be monitoring not only your third party, but your locations to identify that service concentration risk. Reporting of major ICT related incidents. How are you going to know about the incident if that supplier doesn't proactively give you a call or send you an email? If there's an incident at a supplier, they're focused on managing that incident. You need to use technology like Supply Wisdom or other platforms to notify for you. Monitoring of your third-party service providers. That's a massive task when you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of different providers. You need to utilize AI and tools to actually monitor them on a real-time basis. And then the last piece for scenario planning for operational resilience testing, another facet of the DORA regulation. You must utilize tools in the way that tools can aggregate data to generate insights to ensure compliance with this.
So let's drill down a little bit to the carrier level. Can you give us a little bit of understanding of what the carriers and MSP should be looking at?
I think, first of all, they should be looking for resiliency and redundancies in their supply chain because they provide such critical services and really keep us connected across a global scale. We were talking a little bit earlier about a hospital system who are dependent on carriers for doctor-patient communications, for electronic health records, and for a myriad of other very important functions that happen day to day. So specifically from a carrier perspective is, where do you not have redundancies in your supply chain? So I would say the first thing is identify your critical suppliers that allow you to maintain 100% of service uptime. So what suppliers do you depend on to keep your service running? From there, ensure those suppliers are continuously monitored for their own health. And then second, ensure you have a backup supplier. Have business continuity and disaster recovery plans or a hot rollover plan. So if that one supplier that you're dependent on does fail, you have a plan in place with that resilient supply chain that you can immediately continue services by moving to a separate vendor. I think that's so incredibly important. And it really goes back to my first point, where you need to know you truly need a clear picture of your vendor population before you can do anything else. And that, I think, applies as well for the carriers.
So Jenna, help us understand this at the carrier level and maybe also for MSPs, MSSPs. What are they really looking at?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is, from the carrier perspective, they keep our world connected. They keep financial institutions in business. They allow trades to happen. From a healthcare perspective, they allow you to talk to your physician, for physicians to send in medication, for electronic health records. There is no, I would say, it's just such a long runway or highway on what carriers provide and how essential their services is that I think it cannot be overstated. So from a resiliency perspective, the first thing I would do to maintain DORA compliance for carriers is to identify those critical suppliers in their own supply chain. So what vendors are they utilizing for critical services? What vendors do they need to stay operational and to have 100% or 99.9% uptime? Then identify those carriers. And then what is your backup plan? Have you had a disaster recovery or a business continuity test with all of those carriers? Do you have a hot rollover? So if one of your critical suppliers that keeps your service running goes down, you automatically have a backup. And I continually go back to have compliance with DORA and to have resiliency in your operation, you must know your supply chain. You must have a true view of your vendor population, identify those critical suppliers, and then monitor them continuously from a vendor health perspective. I would say the same thing goes for those MSSPs as well. I think, financial institutions, carriers, healthcare organizations, they all provide such vastly different services, but it all starts with really understanding your outsourced population, identifying the criticality of a certain subset of vendors, and then maintaining resilience in that specific supply chain.
So, as we close up our podcast today, help me understand the competitive advantage that's involved in getting compliant.
I think it's huge. I think one, from a reputational perspective, you do not want to be that first company that is fined for non-DORA compliance, right? So January 17th was that, I almost want to say magic day, but I would argue no one thought it was magic, but that was really the first day that DORA went live. But if you look at the regulation, there are many, many more milestones to come in how companies must show compliance with this regulation. So to maintain a competitive advantage, one, make sure that you're compliant now. Show compliance. Show that you have a view of your supply chain. Work with your partners on those disaster recovery and resiliency testing. I think the first thing that's going to do is maintain your reputation. Go back to GDPR and, some of the first companies that had multi-million-dollar fines because they weren't in compliance. You don't want that to be you from a competitive perspective. But very, very close behind that is staying up or not having a service interruption if something does fail. Then you are out of compliance with your customers, you're out of compliance with the regulatory environment, and very quickly your competitors will take advantage of that. And if you are utilizing the tools available to you, like a Supply Wisdom that continuously monitors these things, it allows you to have that competitive advantage. You don't need to rely on, sifting through millions of news sources a day, all of the alerts for thousands of vendors, watching the news to see if something happens. Those early indicators that you might have a non-resilient supply chain or there might be an issue can be identified ahead of time, which gives you an incredible competitive advantage, not only with DORA, but just across all of the services and regulations that you need to adhere to.
Jenna, I really want to thank you for joining me today. This has really been interesting, giving us a quick overview of DORA, why it's very important, why it's relevant, especially to the carrier, MSP, MSSP market, also for the enterprise too. Where can we learn more about Supply Wisdom?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. If you couldn't tell, I think I can talk about this all day. There's so many different ways that Supply Wisdom helps to solve the DORA regulatory environment, but also just all of your outsourced risks. So we'd love to talk to you more. You can reach out directly to us at supplywisdom.com. You can book a demo or you can email me directly. I would love to talk to everyone about how we help all customers across all verticals ensure DORA compliance, as well as maintain a safe and resilient supply chain. So thank you, Doug, so much for having me.
Jenna, again, thank you very much indeed. I know this is not our last conversation on this. We're just beginning. Compliance just started. So I'm looking forward to our next one. But for now, thank you very much indeed.
Me too. Have a wonderful day.